Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today we're going to be looking at the Klein electrical hybrid plier, part number 44216. Now, there's three things I want you to know about this multi-tool right off the start. The first of which is that while it carries the Klein name, it is actually not built in the United States, it's built in China. And we're going to touch more on that a little later. The second thing I want you to know is that this particular multi-tool does not come with its own sheath. So I believe that Klein sells a sheath that this multi-tool will fit into. I don't happen to know that part number. I also have found that it fits very nicely in like the Leatherman Molly sheaths for something like the OHT. It fits very nicely in those sheaths. The third thing is because it's Chinese manufactured, the price point is going to reflect that. So you can actually pick this up for $20. Now, I paid a little bit more for this one because I bought it in store. I think I paid like 25 or 26. But if I would have got it online, I could have got it for 20. So that is the one of the biggest benefits to having it be Chinese manufactured is the price point, and that's going to make it appealing to a lot of different people. Well, we're going to jump through the specs of this thing, show you the 7 different tools and functions. We're going to test out those strippers a little bit, see how good they are, see basically whether or not they are worthy of the Klein name. Kind of give you some of my thoughts on what I think of this multi-tool, and then we're going to touch base a little bit more on that Chinese manufacturing thing. Well, without further ado, let's get into it. So one of the things that it does on this multi-tool is it's going to come with the anodized aluminum scales, and that's going to add a little bit to the overall thickness of this multi-tool. So the weight on this is 10.58 ounces, or about 299 grams. Its overall length is 4.5 inches in the closed position, or about 114 millimeters. At its widest point, it is a very stout inch and 3/4 wide, or about 45 millimeters, somewhere in that neighborhood. And the thickness is about the same as the Surge at 13/16 of an inch, or 21 millimeters. And just mentioning the Surge, let's bring it in here. You kind of get an idea of just how big this multi-tool is, and you can see that with the exception of a little bit up here on top because of that little bit different handle design, it completely covers the Surge. So this is not a small multi-tool, it is quite large. Now this particular multi-tool has 7 different functions. The first of which we're going to look at the outside tools first. So it has a knife blade, and you notice that I can actually open that one-handed. It has a nail nick, so it's not designed to be open one-handed, but you can actually, if you put enough pressure on it, you can open it one-handed. And it has a very positive lockup. That's something that impressed me with this multi-tool. Now, the blade steel on this is going to be 440A stainless. I don't know enough about 440A stainless to kind of give you an idea of where it falls in the spectrum of knife steels. I really should have researched that a little bit more before making this video. But the knife blade is not bad, actually, and it actually comes out fairly sharp too. It's not super sharp out of the box, but it's not super dull either. Well, I've been playing with it a little bit, so it's not the greatest, but you can see it's actually pretty decent. So the blade length on this is going to be 3 1/16 of an inch, or about 78 millimeters. So not a bad blade on it. It is a drop point hollow ground blade, and it looks like it'd be fairly easy to sharpen up. I haven't put a sharpener on this one yet, but it's not a bad blade by any stretch of the imagination, and it is liner locked on the outside. Then on the opposite side, now these two tools are actually a little tough. There's quite a bit of back tension on them. So the first is going to be a number 2 Phillips, and I will say that the reach on that number 2 in a full dimensional, and now this is not what you're going to get in a lot of multi-tools where you have a combination number 1, number 2 Phillips. This is actually a standard number 2 Phillips, and it works very, very well. Now, while these are not locking on this side, they do have a pretty good amount of tension, so it's not something that is going to be folding up on you. I don't mind these two screwdrivers over here. They really do lock up pretty decently. The next one is going to be a 3/16 flat driver, and like I said, and then the reach on that is going to be, pretty robust too. You go out there about 1 3/4 of an inch long, 1 3/4 of an inch long. Kind of misspoke there. So it's not a bad reach on there. It gives you a pretty good reach. Then the last tool on the outside is going to be, let's see where they're hidden. Here they are. Is going to be a set of, they call them metal splinter remover, I think, but they're just a set of tweezers. They're not bad tweezers. They're not super excellent, but if you're working in the electrical trade in commercial electric and you're working with conduit all the time, then at some point you're going to run across where you're going to get one of those metal slivers. And I work in the steel industry, so I know how bad those things hurt, and having the ability to have a set of tweezers on you can be quite beneficial. Now, the hybrid plier is kind of a cross between a lineman plier and electrician's plier, or a wire stripper. So it's interesting. It really is. And the pliers are one of the things that I like. Now, the fitment on the pliers is really, really good, actually. You don't get any movement in there, or so slight that it's insignificant. So that is really nice. Has a nice crosshatch pattern here, crosscut pattern for the grip on there too. So for grabbing onto wire and twisting it, turning it, whatever, it really has a lot of grip on there. Now, it has the ability to cut between 12 and 16 gauge stranded, or 10 and 14 gauge solid. It's one of my complaints about this multi-tool. I kind of see this more as the type of person that'd be using this, or how it should be marketed to, in my opinion, would be like to a commercial electrician who needs something on their hip. Now, commercial electricians are going to carry a variety of high quality tools, but this is kind of one of those, if you're on a little repair job or something like that, I think this would be a good tool to have with you. The one thing that I don't like is that I wish that there was a little bit less on the cutters and they added in a slot for 10 gauge stranded, because when you're working with 480, when you're working with motors that are going to be somewhere between, 2 and 7.5 horsepower, more often than not they're going to be wired in with 10 gauge stranded. And so for what this should be targeted for, I think they should have added 10 gauge stranded in here as well. Now, you do have a set of anvil cutters on here. These are not bypass cutters, and the cutters are actually really, really long. Has a wide area there for wire cutting. Now, they're not going to open up where you're going to be able to get, you might be able to get 6 gauge in there and cut that all right. If you're lucky, you'd really have to cram 4 gauge in there to get them to cut. And then, it's really going to be stretching the limits of this tool. But we're going to test it out a little bit and kind of see how those strippers work. Okay, so I've got a couple of selections of wire here. We've got 16 gauge, 14 gauge, and 12 gauge stranded. And we're going to kind of see how well these pliers work on there. So the first one is 16 gauge stranded. Give it a little twist around, and well, that doesn't seem to want to be, that it's cutting through there that well. Let's try that again. Give it a little more twist. Nope. Boy, that is just not doing a great job at all. You can see it's leaving a little bit of that insulation attached there, and really not doing a good job at all. Let's jump up to the 14 gauge, see if it makes a difference. Now, the 14 gauge stranded cutters are what you should be on the stranded side. You can see that they're marked STR for stranded, and then on the other side SLD for solid. But the stranded wire cutters are not cutting very well into this, and you can see we're getting the same problem where we're leaving just a touch of that insulation grabbing on there. It doesn't want to go through. Now, the cutters themselves work pretty well. Let's try that again and see if we can't. Maybe it's just me not getting it rotated enough. But you shouldn't have to do that on a good set of quality electrician's pliers. They should be able to just come right out of there. And still, it just does not seem to be doing that good of a job. Oh my goodness, that's tough. And that is just not working at all. Not very efficient. Well, let's try one last time with the 12 gauge. Now, jump around a little bit and kind of hit it a couple times and give it a full twist and see if we're having the same issues. Didn't quite have it there. And that still does not want to come off. So let me jump down to the 14 gauge, which would be 12 gauge solid. My goodness. Those cutters are just not getting her done. Now, if we get down on 14 gauge, but you can tell you don't want to do that with wire though, because you can see how it nicks the wire there, and electricians will tell you right off the start that is a no. So it should be cutting through there without any effort. Now, I don't have any solid wire to test it on, and solid wire is going to strip a lot easier than stranded wire does. And maybe this is because this THHN, I don't know why it's not getting through there, but they do not seem to be very effective on the stranded wire that I'm testing here. Well, let's talk about what are some of the good things and the bad things. And I'll be quite honest with you, because that wire stripping functionality is not working the way it should work, the way I expect Klein tools to work, it's going to be very hard for me to say anything positive about this multi-tool. But let's try. The first thing that I do like is the hybrid pliers, the top of the hybrid pliers, that squared off, that cross hatch pattern. They really allow you to grip on. So they're not quite lineman pliers, but they really do have a lot of grip. I also like the long length of the cutters. They give you a lot of real estate in there too, and it handles wire cutting with ease, by the way. I don't think I showed you that. So just cutting through just about anything you want is going to be relatively effortless. We'll just get it right there in the center. You can see it just has no problem doing that. So the wire cutting functionality is pretty good on these. The wire strippers are just not what I expect from Klein. They're just not doing it for me. The bulk of this, it doesn't feel bad in the hand, but one thing I will tell you is that I have pretty large hands, and even for me, this is getting to the level of it's a little too large. Now, and this is coming from a guy that uses a surge, so for me, even it's a little bit too big. The tools themselves, I like that. I like both drivers actually. I like that number 2 Phillips on there. I like the 3/16 driver. Those are both okay and pretty robust. I think that slotted driver is going to be able to handle a decent amount of torque too, especially if it's just an electrical trade. One thing that I will say, if the way they're marketing this thing is that electricians see a lot of number 1, number 2 Robinson. So that should be a bit that this might have been better off in a bit exchanger with a combo number 2 3/16 driver plus a number 1, number 2 Robertson to go with it. I think that would have been a better tool set for it. The tweezers, I mean, they're there. They're nothing really good or bad to say about them. The shining light for this multi-tool has probably got to be its knife blade, though. It's not a bad blade. It's not, obviously, it's not something that you're going to find in high-quality knives, but for what it is, it's not bad. Now, the overall bulk of this thing is kind of a detractor. It really is, because the curved surface of the handles makes it a decent grip. Feels decently solid, but even for me, it's getting a little bit too large to handle. One thing I will say is that the pliers are very smooth acting. While they're not spring loaded, they are really smooth. So that is another positive. I think on the whole, this multi-tool is going to be probably a grade C for me. The price point is really attractive at $20, but it doesn't matter how cheap it is. If it can't get the job done, then it's not worth even the small investment. And that's just the way I feel about most tools. If you're going to spend the money on something to get a job done, then it doesn't matter how much you spend to a certain, within reason. You want it to work every single time. It's one of the reasons why for a lot of my engine driven stuff, I'll make sure that it has a Honda engine on it, because when I want it to run or when I need it. And some of those types of tools will be sitting for long periods of time before I need them. But when I fire it up, I want it to work. It's another reason why I buy steel products, because they're just good quality tools. I mean, they just are. I'm going to give this a C grade. It's the bulk is too much for me. The wire stripping functionality, maybe it's just a bad day and it's just not working well for me, but I couldn't get it to work very well. And I have a lot of Klein strippers too, and they work fantastic. This one's just not getting it done. The hybrid plier design I do like, though. I will say that. I think there's a lot of space in here. You know, that you can see the separation in these drivers. They had a lot of room where they could have added something else in there, or they could have put these closer together and put another outside accessible tool on here. A good tool that I think would great for this multi-tool would have been a file, but they only have the 7 tools, so I find it hard to say anything good about it, because the main function, the thing that I would buy it for, is just not on par with what I expect, even from a cheaper made multi-tool, even from a Chinese manufactured multi-tool. I want it to work. It at least has to work. It may not work as good, but it should at least get through some pretty simple wire. That's just 16, 14, and 12 gauge stranded standard THHN, so it should have no problem getting through those 3 wires. You know, when talking about tools that are manufactured in China, you're seeing this more and more in today's world, and I'm not oblivious to the fact that we live in a global world or a global market. So a lot of the tools that we're going to get in today's world are going to be manufactured in countries that have a lower labor rate, such as China or such as Thailand or any number of other places, Mexico. But sometimes, especially with tools like this, especially when you're dealing with steels, you'll find that the quality of the steels that are in those countries or that they're using to manufacture this stuff with is not the same quality as you're going to find in U.S. steel or Canadian steel or even Mexican steel, for that matter. Mexico has some fairly decent steel for the most part, but it can be quite brittle in different applications as well. It just depends what you're getting. So while we live in this global world, and you're going to find a lot of companies are doing this, where they're lending out their name or they're marketing their name, or I can't think of the word right now, where they are licensing their name to these other companies to put their product name on whatever product another company is manufacturing. You see this with Rigid Tools. Rigid actually doesn't make their own battery power tools. So the cordless tools are actually made by another company in China, which markets them in the U.S. as Rigid, but across the rest of the world, I think they're marketed as AEG. And they've been making tools for a long time. And the Rigid tools, I'm not trying to say that the Rigid tools are bad, but when you compare them to other higher end tools like DeWalt, and DeWalt's not super high end, but they have quality stuff, or Milwaukee, which most Milwaukee stuff is made in China these days, or Hilti, which is, has excellent cordless tools. They just don't have enough in their line. Then that's when you kind of see the discrepancies. You kind of see, the level of manufacturing and the level of quality. And when it comes to tools, I've learned the hard way. And, sometimes you just buy what you can afford, or sometimes you only buy what you need. I don't see any reason for a homeowner to go out and buy Hilti cordless tools, because those are specifically geared for the commercial industry, where they're getting abused and they're getting used every single day. If you're going to buy something for your house, then look at Ryobi or, look at Rigid. Those are decent cordless tools that are great for little home projects. You don't necessarily need the highest end of everything. But when it comes to a tool like this that we're looking at, this Klein multi-tool, the wire stripping functionality should be better. It just should. If they're not going to be able to meet the standard of what the tool should actually do, then it's not going to get very high marks from me, for sure. I would rather I think even my little Leatherman Squirt ES4 will do wire better than this thing will. Now it definitely doesn't have the robustness of those hybrid pliers. I'll give it that, and or the real estate of those cutters. But this tool is just not going to get a good grade for me. I wish it was better. I wanted it to be better. It's just, I just can't recommend it. I'm sorry. This is my review of the Klein hybrid electrician's pliers. I wish I could say something good about it. I really do. At any rate, I hope you liked this review. If you did, please hit the thumbs up button, and I'll see you in the next one.